So I have had this channel for about a year by this point, and I have went on to cover over 120 different games. That's really ridiculous, right? Now, back in May, I did a video titled the top 15 best mobile MMORPGs of 2020. And in it, I went on to detail what were, in my opinion, 15 of the best MMOs that I'd played on mobile devices until that point. This video is more or less the same, but instead will depict my thoughts on what the best RPGs are to play in 2020. I get asked quite often, mind you, hey Stix, what mobile games are you playing in 2020? So here I am, ready to disclose all of this information that will hopefully help some of you guys out. Now let's go ahead and jump into this. I'm gonna go right ahead here and start this off with what is probably the most recently released RPG as of this moment, Sin Alice. This is one of the few really engaging RPGs to me. I love dark games and I love deep stories, something that Yoko Taro is quite good at. Sin Alice is a beautiful new RPG from the creator behind Nier Automata, and it shows in what is one of my new favorite mobile RPGs. The game makes use of an interesting card-based, turn-based combat system, has players collect a variety of different characters, and is a refreshing change of pace to the generic, typical types of RPG we get traditionally. Iron Saga is another interesting RPG that I actually haven't posted yet as of this video going live, but I felt a need to include it due to several different reasons. One, the soundtrack is composed by none other than Sawano Hiroyuki herself, yeah, the very same composer for Guilty Crown, Attack on Titan, Kill La Kill, Seven Deadly Sins, Xenoblade Chronicles, and so much more. The game is very story-driven and graphically the game looks great, but what interested me the most about the game is the combat. See, you have a kind of manual control over your pilots, which are your units in battle. You can give them commands and have them move around the battle arena you're engaged in and collect items, but otherwise they move, act, and fight on their own. Micromanaging your units so they don't get themselves killed can be a little tricky, but it adds layers that I didn't know I needed to a game like this. I know technically Fate Grand Order is a little older than the first two games listed here, but that doesn't make it any less of an amazing title. There's more story in this game than I have probably ever seen in a mobile RPG, something that, while I'm more than fine with normally, I had to skip a little bit of so I could actually progress with the overall game. At its core, Grand Order is your typical gacha game, but at the same time, it offers so much more. The interesting card-based, turn-based combat required a little strategy, and being set in a Fate world really kept me enthralled for the hours that I played for. So I never personally played through the Seven Deadly Sins Grand Cross, but MRSSSTIX did. So naturally I asked her for her opinion of the game, as I know a lot of you guys enjoyed Grand Cross quite at length. According to MRSSSTIX, this game is quite an accurate retelling of the anime, considering we'd watched the first 3 seasons on Netflix. The characters' personalities were kept intact, the story was retold while adding in side stories that weren't present in the anime. The combat was once again card-based and turn-based, however each character had access to their own unique abilities like Meliodas' full counter. All in all, for a fan of the franchise, this was a fantastic title to play through. It's a gacha game through and through, with players unlocking characters to play as, of which there are quite a few. A lot of you tell me that King's Raid is one of the best RPGs on mobile devices, so I would have to be crazy to not include it in this list. And thankfully I wholeheartedly agree with you all. This is another game with a pretty large emphasis on story, having players make their way through chapters on the overworld map, fighting encounter after encounter, recruiting new heroes, and battling to save the world. There's quite a bit to do in King's Raid, and although it is a gacha game, it feels much more like a traditional RPG than most of the other titles in this list. I played for several hours and never unlocked any additional characters outside of the main 4-man cast and the main character's brother, I think? Graphically, the game looks pretty damn good. The combat is turn-based, having players click from a selection of up to 3 different skills in between character auto attacks. Exos Heroes is a very new title, not as new as Sin Alice, but this game just released last month, and it is probably one of the 3 best RPGs I have ever played over the course of this channel's existence. Exos Heroes is one of the few RPGs that feel genuinely like I'm playing an older JRPG, almost as if the creators of the game knew what made JRPGs good, what made them successful and worth investing time into, and made a mobile title replicating that success. With a pretty humorous main story, an actual fully traversable world map that you can explore, a quality turn-based combat system, and actual voice acting for the main story, this is truly an RPG that you should not miss. I cannot stress enough how good this game looks and feels. This is the first RPG in this list thus far where you take full possession of your character in battle. Up until this point, your characters participated in turn-based combat, but 100 Soul is very different. Not only is this game pretty damn beautiful, but it also has some impressive full action combat. And if the combat wasn't a high enough selling point for you, while technically there were missions you'd take from the overworld map, you'd actually be taken into the zones physically and would have the freedom to run around and fight enemies on your own, something that I feel is sorely missing from a lot of mobile RPGs. Too often you don't have any real freedom over your choices, over your exploration. 100 Soul is very different, albeit a little linear. There's a lot of story present, but it isn't as overwhelming as some of the other titles in this list. Blade Lord is a pretty traditional RPG. Yes, it features chapter-based progression where you click a chapter, you participate in several waves of monster battles, and then you move on to the next chapter, but at the same time it provides players a very JRPG-esque story that I quite enjoyed over the few hours that I played through it. Graphically, the game isn't as impressive as several of the other games included in this list, but the combat provided more options to actively participate than most, having 4 different skills per character and allowing you to directly control each character and their ability usage. I feel like a game like this would have heavily benefited from having the freedom to control your character outside of combat, but that's just me. While not the best mobile RPG overall, this is definitely one of the best looking ones, and that is an undeniable truth. Dragon Raja is also the first and one of the 3 total MMORPGs included in this list. As this is an MMO, there's a lot that separates it from your average RPG, such as a large open world to explore, the ability to freely run around and engage enemies at your own pace however you feel like, character creation and customization. Speaking of characters in the world, Dragon Raja is absolutely beautiful, having some of the best graphics in an RPG by far. The combat is also fast action combat, and although it isn't as good as 100 Soul, it's damn good in its own right. It also has a story, something that in my experience most MMOs tend not to have, or they do have it, but they're just so bad that you wish they didn't. Okay, I'm just gonna go ahead here and refer to this as Rising Steel because I don't want to have to recite the name out loud. Now, Rising Steel is an interesting game. See, it's technically a gacha game providing a plethora of different heroes from the Sword Art universe to recruit and deploy in battle, of which is turn-based with some pretty flashy abilities, but at the same time, the story allows you to move, albeit horizontally and vertically only, around linear zones filled with random encounters and pathways leading to treasure and boss fights. While I feel like the game would have been much better with a little more control over your character, I can happily appreciate having the control we already have. The story is pretty accurate to the Alicization arc from the anime from what I can tell, and I enjoyed getting to play through some of it on my own. Dawn of Ios is probably the most unique RPG I've ever played on mobile devices. See, this is an MMORPG, an actual full-fledged MMORPG, but at the same time, this is a survival crafting game as well, providing players the ability to cut down trees, harvest resources, craft new items, new gear, like everything, like you would in a game like Rust or Ark. Yet at the same time, it's also an RPG filled with story and a sense of progression. Graphically, Dawn of Ios is a very aesthetically appealing MMO, and having a fast action combat system, it took me a little by surprise. Overall, this is probably one of my favorite mobile MMOs and one of my 5 favorite RPGs of all time on the platform. Azure Lane is the only game of its kind I've played in the year of having this channel. The game is absolutely adorable. You take missions from the map, you deploy your units, and you move around a tile-based grid, doing combat with enemy ships while making your way towards the main boss of the mission. Battle takes the form of kinda like a shmup. You move horizontally and vertically, attempting to dodge enemy fire while allowing your ships to fire, all the while waiting for your special abilities to come off cooldown so you can nuke the enemies. There's plenty of story, but honestly I feel like it isn't really all that important, but that's just me. Epic 7 actually has some of the best character models I've ever seen in an RPG, no joke. I need to actually get into this again and play through it a lot more because, my lord. Now admittedly, I never did play through Epic 7 as much as I could have, and that's partly due to the fact that the game went into maintenance as I was recording it, but I enjoyed every minute of the time I spent in it. The game is very heavily story driven with plenty of eye candy to go around. There's a main cast of waifus, a main cast of characters to recruit and play with, play as. Man, I am really really messing myself up with this one. Like your typical RPGs, you take missions and you deploy your units to do battle. This is a main form of progression in the game, and what allows you to not only recruit additional characters, but to also unlock new zones. Combat is auto, but you have a few abilities located down the bottom right of the screen that you can utilize of your own free will, providing some interaction. Honkai Impact 3rd is one of my favorite mobile RPGs. It has some of the best action combat in the genre, and it's also one of the best looking games in the genre. Yes, the game has you take missions from a menu like the majority of mobile RPGs, but the gameplay in this game, the story between all the waifus is, let's be real here, there are no males to play as in the game, and the sheer amount of characters you can unlock and play as is incredible. I know, I'm being very shallow here, but Honkai Impact is one of the most popular RPGs available on mobile devices right now, and it's very evident why that is. I really have to do an updated video on Rangers of Oblivion because it was one of the few MMORPGs that really looked and felt unique to me. The game functioned much like a Monster Hunter title, with players being able to go out at instanced areas with other players or alone, engage giant monsters in fast-paced action combat, dismember them, break off limbs, and hunt pretty much anything and everything that moves outside of the city gates. The game is beautiful and provides players a lot of freedom to run around and explore the zones you currently occupy. There's also plenty of story and some honestly pretty atrocious English voice acting, but if you ignore the voice acting, the game itself is a title that you should not miss, especially given that it's an MMO. And there we have it, 15 mobile RPGs that I feel like you should definitely take a look at if you're looking for something to play. But this is my opinion, my impressions of the genre right now. What do you guys think? What are your favorite mobile RPGs right now? Let me know down in the comments below and let's talk about it. Anyway guys, that is it for me. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you all next time.
Someday soon, I'm gonna make it. Yeah, all hard work's gonna be worth it.